So, we are now in April, the month of our Lord, I guess, or sometimes it's in March. This year it's April, so yeah, month of our Lord. Means another month is over with, and we are beginning a new venture of reading, a month of April. And for today's video, of course, we're going to recap everything that I read in the month of March, everything I plan to read in the month of April. You know how these videos work. I'm going to give a little rating, I'm going to give a little review, my thoughts and everything, and you guys are either going to enjoy it or hate me for some of my opinions, and that's fine. Just please, whatever you do, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, stick around. I make a lot of videos like this. If you want to see videos on movies, television, video games, all that stuff, I have another channel that, guess what, is my name. It's Joseph Marchioni. It's also in the link in the description. You can click on that. Go subscribe over there and stick around. So I read 5 books in the month of March, which is great. I try to average around 5 books a month, 60 books a year. So I will have 5 books to talk about here, and then 5 more books on my TBR. So let's jump right in. The first 2 books I read in the month, and I'm going to count these as 2 because they are a duology, are the Shepherd King duology. One Dark Window and Two Twists of Crowns. These are by Rachel Gillig. And they tell the story of this girl who is living with this nightmare in her head. She has this monster that is living within her. This is a fantasy/romantasy series, if I'm being honest, and a lot of people say it's not really romantasy. It kind of is. And it takes place in this dark, gothic world with a very interesting magic system that includes this use of cards, right? You have these cards that, if you're holding the card, it gives you a certain sort of power, and there's a trade-off to using these cards. Everything that you do in this universe, there is a consequence to it, which is a big part of the theme. I enjoy these books for the most part. There's stuff in them that aren't really my cup of tea when it comes to fantasy novels, right? A lot of the romantasy stuff, the cringy stuff, the tropey male characters here just don't exactly work for me altogether. But the world, the magic system, the vibes, the action, all of that stuff I thought was excellent, and I enjoyed the ride that the books take you on. I thought the first book was a solid introduction into this world. I thought the second book was even better as a novel, sort of expanding the world a little bit, but also giving a multiple perspective type of story here, where you're not just following the one main character, but you're following a lot of these side characters that I actually found to be more interesting than the main character in this book. Overall, this is a really good story. I kind of want to make a whole video on these two, so that might be coming soon. I'll try to keep a lot of my more detailed thoughts for that. But the one thing I will say is this feels like a very good gateway drug into fantasy. If you're somebody that's coming from that romantasy world or romance or hasn't really read sort of fantasy novels at all, this is probably the duology or the series that I would recommend to get into that sort of genre. I know a lot of people recommend Mistborn first, and although I think Mistborn is phenomenal and way better than this and one of my favorite book trilogies of all time, I feel like this one is a little bit easier and lighter to get through than it would probably be if somebody came to me and said, hey, I want to get into fantasy. I've only really read a lot of romantasy stuff and those types of books. I would say, hey, take these. It's got magic systems, it's got a cool world, it's got some dark themes, but it's also got all the things that you probably already like about your novels. So yeah, Shepherd King duology. I'm going to give One Dark Window a 3 out of 5 and Two Twists of Crowns a 3.5 out of 5. Let's move on. As one does, I moved on to the next logical choice of books after reading a duology about dark, gothic, fantasy, and romance and love. Yeah, I moved on to Dungeon Crawler Carl, baby, the series that everybody apparently can't shut up about. I wanted to see what the hype's about, just like everybody else. I'm seeing all those TikToks, I'm seeing all those YouTube videos. What is this series all about? Why? Is it as good as they say? Yes and no at the same time, I guess. Dungeon Crawler Carl, it's a mixed bag for me. It's a book that I really enjoyed reading, but it's also not a book that I felt so in love with that I need to move on to book number 2 right now, like a lot of people said you end up feeling when you get through this first one. So what is Dungeon Crawler Carl? It's a book where you follow this guy, Carl, right? He's a human on Earth, an Earth that has just been devastated by this cataclysmic event. Now all humans that are left are forced to compete in this dungeon crawl. It's very much like an RPG video game style dungeon TV show that's being aired around the galaxy to all these different alien races. And we follow Carl and his cat, Princess Donut, who's a great character as they just experience this dungeon. And there's a lot here that I love. This book is hilarious, and the prose and how it presents this game is really funny. It got a lot of big chuckles out of Joe. I enjoy the characters here. Carl and Princess Donut are so good, and they work off each other super well. I enjoy the world and the aspects of it, but there are things about this book that didn't vibe with me. I think at times it can be a little bit slow for what this book actually is, being this silly dungeon crawl, right? It is a little slow at times. I also think it takes a lot of time to explain the mechanics of its world and the lit RPG elements of its story, which I get is probably very intriguing to a lot of people, but for somebody like me, who's just a characters and story guy, and that's all I really care about, I don't care about the lit RPG elements going on here. I just found myself zoning out in those moments of the book. I love the ending, though. I love where it leads off, and I am excited to get into book number 2. I think this is a solid book 1. Is it my favorite thing in the world, though? Not really. So I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. It's really good, but I'm not dying to get in the book 2, and maybe that'll get me a lot of hate. I don't know. We'll see. Another book 1 I jumped into was Empire of Silence, Sun Eater book 1. This is another book. My God, Sun Eater. All I've been hearing the last year of my life is this is the greatest series in the world. This series, it cures disease. It's literally the greatest thing that has ever been put on planet Earth. But the other thing I've been hearing about Sun Eater is that this book specifically, book number 1, Empire of Silence, is not that good. It's the worst in the series, and that you have to kind of push yourself to get through it to get to the good shit, which is always my least favorite thing to hear about book series. Like, hey, trust me, it gets good after, like, 1,000 pages. Like, that is always, like, I would like to hear, hey, book 1, it grips you on page 1, and you're stuck for 10 books. Like, that's what I usually like to hear. But I went into this expecting it to be a little bit of a slog, and listen, it kind of is. I will say the first 100 pages of this book are excellent. There's political intrigue. I love Hadrian Marlowe, the main character here. He's such a strong central character to base your whole story on. I really like the prose, the world building. Everything going on here in the first 100 pages is so well done. It felt like Dune, but expanded, where Dune is pretty much all taking place on Arrakis, on this one place. This felt like that, but we're expanding that sort of philosophical world. My issues with this book really start kind of when the adventure really starts getting going. Right, when Hadrian Marlowe has to move from point A to point B, and the book starts becoming something a little bit different, where it's no longer this real political intrigue story, it's not this epic sort of world-building sci-fi classic, it's more of a story about survival and living, and there's a lot of aspects of that story that worked for me, right? There's a lot of elements and characters that come in and out that got me a little bit emotional even at times, but there's also a lot of what feels like meandering. Things happen almost too fast at certain points. Hadrian is going to all these different places, meeting all these different people, and time is passing in a way that never makes it feel like you're actually in one place for enough time to actually care about what's going on. And because of that, although it's moving fast, it feels really slow, because you feel like you're just going from point A to point B to point C to point D so fast that you just don't care about any of it. And that just kind of meanders and stays that way for almost like 300 pages. Now, eventually, it does settle back down, and the third act of this book, the last like 100 pages, are so great, and it's like a little teaser of everything that I think people love about this series. I don't know, I haven't read on yet, but I think the things people usually talk about that they love and enjoy about all of the other books to come, I think are the elements that are in the final, like, 100 pages of this beast. So unlike Dungeon Crawler Carl, where I wasn't really compelled to immediately pick up book 2, I am compelled immediately to jump into the next book in this series, and I will be very soon. We'll talk about it soon. And although this is only a 3 out of 5 read for me, I can't give it anything higher than that, I still really loved it. I still am really intrigued about the rest of the series, and I don't really have much of a doubt that the rest of the series is going to be like a 5 out of 5. Like, it seems like this world, the characters, there is just so much potential there for greatness, and apparently that greatness has been seen in those other books that I'll be reading soon. I then read my most anticipated read of the year, the brand new Hunger Games prequel, Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I love the Hunger Games books, man. I grew up with them. I literally grew up with Hunger Games, Catching Fire, Mockingjay, absolutely love them, love the movies. I was super, super excited for this, and it lived up to all of the hype. Sunrise on the Reaping, it follows Haymitch, one of the best characters from the original trilogy. It follows his games, the 50th Hunger Games, the Second Quarter Quell, which we know a lot about from Catching Fire, where there's like a lot of information about his game. So they're really going into this book wasn't too much of a surprise on what was going to happen. But Susan Collins finds a way to deliver everything you want. The emotions, the sort of sub-commentary on fascism and governments and all these horrible, horrible things. It delivers a really great villain, yet again, with Snow, who's like the greatest villain in, like, who's like one of my favorite villains ever, and there's just more of him here and more elements of him that are just so new and incredible. You have such a great central character in Haymitch who really feels like this sort of almost Mockingjay type persona and character. A lot of the other side characters that we didn't know much about from Catching Fire are so, so good. She finds ways to bring in elements of the larger story in the universe here, even the other prequel. The games are done so well. Everything here just feels like cinema. Like, this is going to be such a good movie when they adapt it. It just feels like it was made for screen. And the ending, goddamn, this is one of the most emotional endings to any book I've ever read. It's amazing. Yeah, this is a 5 out of 5 read. Read it in one sitting. Go read this book. Go read all the Hunger Games books. They're amazing. To close off March and start April, I have been reading The Lies of Locke Lamore by Scott Lynch, a book that's been sitting on my shelf for like a year. here. And listen, I've heard nothing but incredible things about this book. How it's one of the greatest fantasy things ever. How it's a must-read for fantasy lovers. And I have finally picked it up and decided to get into it. I'm only about 100 pages in. This thing is putting me in a reading slump. I must be missing something. I don't know. Maybe it just hasn't hooked me yet. I've been waiting for the hook. And I've heard it happens early in the book, but it has not happened for me. So far, I'm just not interested in what's going on. And I don't know if this is a Lies of Locke Lamore problem or a me problem, if I'm just in a weird headspace at the moment where no book is really going to scratch that itch, but I've been trying to force myself to continue pushing forward because I know how much this thing is beloved and how it's one of those books where nobody really questions how good it is, and I'm like, there must be something wrong with me right now because it's just not vibing with me. There's stuff I like about it. I love Locke Lamore as a character. I kind of love the world and the interesting, gritty dialogue that's displayed here by Scott Lynch. He's clearly a very talented writer. I'm just waiting for it to click, and maybe in the next 100 pages it will, and the last, 400 pages will fly by, and this will be a 5 out of 5 read next month, but stay tuned, we'll see. Once I finish that, I need to get myself, whether I'm going to continue to be in a reading slump, or maybe I'll get out of it by the end of that book, but I want to make sure I have something in the middle here that I know will definitely get me out of it, something that I've been meaning to read for a while, and I will finally be picking up. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is a book that's been on my TBR forever. I read Blake Crouch's Recursion, which is just one of my favorite books of all time, and such an easy read. That book flies by, and it is an easy book to get out of any reading slump, and this is a book that I've heard is maybe even better from him. It's a book that deals with parallel universes and other sci-fi elements. I don't know. I'm going in pretty blind, but I just know if I'm in a reading slump still after Locke Lamore, this is probably going to get me out of it pretty fast, so this will be my next read. One of the reasons I need a book like that to put in the middle of Lies, Locke, and Lore and the book I'm about to show is because this next book is a big one. I'm talking about Oathbringer in the Stormlight Archive, book number 3 of Stormlight. And listen, this one won't put me in a slump, because listen, I've already read 2 of these behemoth Stormlight books, and I've really, really enjoyed both of them. They do take a while to get through, and they really are like 3 novels in themselves. But yeah, but I know what to expect. I know these characters. I love this world. So I'm not really afraid to pick this one up. I just know it's going to take me a minute to get through. And it's taken me a while to go from Words of Radiance to picking up Oathbringer, mainly because I've heard the series does take sort of a downward drop after Words of Radiance. I've heard Oathbringer, there's some people that say it's the best in the series. There's other people that say it sucks, right? I know after this, Rhythm of War, Wind and Truth, people don't love those books. So, I'm not exactly excited to get into what's considered the slog of Stormlight. But I will be picking up Oathbringer this month. I would like to have Stormlight done by, the summer. So, maybe a book a month. We'll see. But this will be picked up very early, and there's a good chance, because this book is so big, that that'll be it for April. I might only get to 3 books. But if I somehow get this thing through in a week and stick to my 5-book-a-month schedule, here are the other 2 books I'll be picking up. I will finally get to James Islington's The Will of the Many, another book that everybody just raves about and talks about being one of the best fantasy books of the last few years. This is another sort of, brick. It is a big boy book, and yeah, I'm excited to get to it. I've heard amazing things. I've heard it's very similar to Red Rising, which is one of my favorite series of all time. It's apparently Roman-inspired fantasy. How original. I'm just kidding. That was mean. Yeah, we love the Romans, right? I'm a dude. We love Rome. So this will be my first read after Oathbringer, and then following this, if I get through this month, we will be moving on in Sun Eater to Howling Dark. I'm going to try to read a Sun Eater book a month, and be prepared to read the last book when it comes out later this year with all of you. This is the book where shit apparently gets real. This is the book where the series becomes one of the greatest things ever, apparently. So yeah, my expectations are really high for this one. I hope it's not a slog and boring and people aren't lying to me, but we'll see. So that's my TBR. What's your TBR? What did you read in the month of March? Let me know down below. Make sure to like this video, subscribe for more, turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.